All right, meeting is recorded.
Okay, we kick this off today. So welcome all. Thanks for joining for today's series of on DevOps. And we today have our guest, Rajesh Razdan, who would present us with AppOps and how they are simplifying applications on Kubernetes. They are part of the executive team from Devtron. We are eager to understand from you guys how you have built this open source solution and what are you doing with the applications and how are you simplifying this conversation around Kubernetes and Kubernetes framework? So the Canada community of practice welcome you, Rajesh, and I'm now giving the forum to you to introduce the application as well as talk about Devtron. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Garima. Pleasure to be here, and good morning to everybody who's dialed in from beautiful Canada. And so it's I'm right now in New Delhi, so it's evening for us. So it's interesting to see different facets of remote life as COVID has put all of us into. And thank you also, Garima, for allowing us to sort of share our story a little bit and how we see the DevOps world emerging, how we see the tooling world emerging, how we see the Kubernetes complexities being drawn into simplification. How is Devtron trying to unravel this a little bit? So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of this. I have, I'll be sharing the screen right now. And just before I do that, I wanted to make a small introduction about a little backstory about Devtron as well and what we're trying to do. And then we'll go and just go slide by slide. I'm trying to keep it fairly simple for all of us because the reason I say that is that the idea of this session is to introduce you to AppOps, why we exist, what made us make this transition from why did we choose Kubernetes, etc., and sort of delve into a little bit of a background of the whole tooling chain, DevOps culture, and what people can do and are already doing in the cloud native space. So I think that's pretty much how the flow of the conversation is going to look like in the next 30 minutes or so. And then we'll have some question answer, etc. And you want to stop me anywhere in between, we can delve into that as well. So just let me know and keep it coming, all questions or comments or anything. So before I share my screen, a little bit of background on myself as well. Somebody's admitting, okay. So Devtron was conceptualized about a year and a half, little about 2 years back when we started to, sort of unravel the world of Kubernetes. Kubernetes is an open source project. And so we come from deep technology background, commercial backgrounds. I come from both commercial as well as technology background. Devtron is my second venture. I'm one of the 3 co-founders in the company. In fact, one of my colleagues, Prakash, who's a product manager, I'd requested him to join as well in case we want to get deeper into any points or facets of discussion that we want to do during the course of our conversations. So Devtron was conceptualized to sort of simplify the application part of the Kubernetes, because there is the infrastructure part, which largely the DevOps folks look at, and then there's that whole development angle of it. And within the CI/CD space, we said that Kubernetes is a complex technology. How do we simplify by focusing simply on the application side of things? And we called ourselves almost, if you come from the zone of Heroku's, etc., infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So we said that we would like to call ourselves like Heroku for Kubernetes. And in a way, why did we focus on application management and what is AppOps? That is going to be essentially, I would be discussing a lot about a little bit of backstory and then further into the being of AppOps and what are we building, etc. And then we go deeper into what are the features, what you can do and cannot do, what we are and what we are not, etc. and all of that. Without further ado, let me just now try and share my screen. I hope it's all visible. Everybody can see my screen?
Yep, that's good.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, so as I said, introduction into AppOps. But before we do that, let's just go to 1 second. Okay. So this is the kind of agenda. We'll talk about a few steps. We'll talk about DevOps, fast forward to history, a quick primer about AppOps and what are the pillars, and then go from there. And then how do you try Devtron, etc. Okay. So let's take a little peek at the history of DevOps. Now, if you look at the historical relevance, essentially, when you look at DevOps, when you look at the infrastructure team, had always a great knowledge about infrastructure, about the OSs and configurations, etc. And there's this application. This is a very typical of an IT structural team where you have the DevOps guys, the configuration management team, the infrastructure, we call it quote unquote, the infrastructure. And then you have the application team, which essentially is the custodian of the application, where they have absolutely brilliant knowledge about the application. Now, historically, before DevOps came into being, the problem was that when the same, and let's go from left to right, left being the source of application and right being the infrastructure side of the story. So the problem started to emerge when application was deployed on the infrastructure, because there were two diverse set of people. There was hardly any sort of process in between. It was fairly broken. This whole chain was kind of broken when you start to look this whole combination and when the application starts to be ported on the infrastructure side of things. So the DevOps history and the DevOps model came into being to basically fix these four elements, which is people, the people who are behind this thing, the process, which basically connects the two together, the culture of DevOps, the culture of whole development and operations. And there was the fourth pillar was the kind of tooling, which came into being. And there is a downward trend to the tooling because tooling became like a very quick fix kind of an element to be a glue between people, process, and culture. Now, look at the contemporary side of DevOps now. Large companies began to realize that as they move into more cloud type or virtualized machines, as well as cloud, as well as more remote working. So large companies spend millions of dollars every year to build and maintain their DevOps system. And the smaller companies which do not have the propensity to spend millions of dollars in that, they try and build their DevOps team, which is kind of straddling between the manual tasks and a bit of an automation, writing scripts, trying to do their quick fixes, etc. Now with that, you have lack of good product knowledge, and this is more like a patchwork. Then you have a very poor user experience, which kind of there's no connectivity between what A team has done between a B team, because there is not a single console to sort of get that going. So it impacts productivity. And almost everybody kind of writes glue codes. Glue code is basically just a quick fix about getting the things in order. So it's very difficult to reuse. It's very difficult to sort of model it to be made something more sophisticated. So this is like how DevOps was being built. And then when I talked about tooling, so what was happening was that there was literally a proliferation of tools from all of these logos that you see, from Jenkins to Spinnakers to Argos. And so now these are tooling in the CI or the CD space, in the observability and the monitoring space and whatnot. I mean, from Prometheus to Tectons to Encores to Clairs of the world. So every tool was focused in solving a certain problem. So developers or DevOps guys were dealing with this plethora of sort of tooling and trying to make sense out of it. It required domain knowledge for these tooling. It also required a little bit of specificity of solving only a specific use case. So technically what you used to do is write a whole lot of scripts and glue codes to build this all together. So I think all of that gave you a quick fix solution, but what it impacted was totally like a user efficiencies. If I talk about user efficiency, that went through the roof because there was no idea of connecting all of these dots together. So that is essentially the DevOps problems being faced. Now, further going into that, so now so this is the process people and the tooling issue. Now the third, when you sort of add the infrastructure provider or the cloud providers into the mix, then you add the container technologies as you go more, as you go building scale, and as you do orchestrations, as you do hundreds and thousands of microservices, what kind of tooling, and whether you're using an open source or a closed source, the complexities started to increase. And literally every cloud native company today, or people who are on microservices, have hundreds of them running in parallel. Your code to commit sort of ratio, the burden on code to commit or code to consumer is increasing because everything is online, everything is real time. You cannot afford to have any kind of downtime. So literally all services are being talked about as live. So there is some insane amount of scale issues that literally everybody's talking about. So from a user standpoint, which is the developers or the DevOps folks, what does that mean? Longer release cycles, very low productivity because there is complexities in tooling, because of there is still a whole lot of manual glue coding and intervention, essentially longer downtime still because you're still doing a patchwork. And obviously, when you do not have control over these building blocks, what you essentially accept is very higher operating costs. So there are two elements of the operating costs when you do not have a congruence in the whole supply chain of development, which is you need more people to manage a particular problem, and or you throw, I mean, there are only two ways to handle a particular problem, I would say. Either you throw people at the problem or you throw money at the problem. So in both the cases, you're increasing a very high amount of operating costs. Now, with this sort of a background, I think what I wanted to give you guys was a background of the DevOps cycle, what DevOps entailed, what did tooling do, and why did we think, because of this approach, Devtron came about the idea of AppOps. Now, what does it mean? So let me just first sort of outline what is not AppOps. So clearly, Kubernetes version upgrades, operating system upgrades, node management in a cluster, policy, defining policies, cluster securities, and managing any third-party applications is not AppOps. What AppOps is essentially our defining moment, and we feel the world of DevOps, the world of Kubernetes should build the applications in this fashion. So it kind of gives you a middleware. It kind of gives you a blueprint of which enables the DevOps teams to delegate responsibility of essentially operationalizing and kind of automating applications through a framework or a guardrail that they have provided. Because this interplay of DevOps as a user group, developers as a user group will always be there. When it comes to um, writing applications, from staging to production and deployment, there will always be under DevOps teams supervision, etc. But can we give them a uniform, coherent view of providing a very seamless infrastructure to actually see what applications, what resources have been allocated to the applications, what policies have been there in order to build without the complexities of either Kubernetes or anything which is northbound in terms of newer technologies? Can we sort of isolate them? Can you just make it very simplified kind of an experience? Now, second, I think when it comes to developing applications, ideally the developer should be completely aloof from what is happening on the infrastructure side and the complexities thereof. So 4 tenets: modularity, extensibility. How does it work well with the existing tools? I think it's very, very important as you introduce a new tool which sort of builds together. So as I said, one of the problems in the tooling was that you need specific knowledge about the tools. Many times people need to know how these tools interplay with each other before you introduce something which is far more multidimensional, but it should kind of adapt the existing tools that you're using as well as the new tools that are being introduced, whether they're open source or closed source, doesn't matter. And I think the final tenet of AppOps approach, or the AppOps way of building platforms, cloud native way, is we looked at any businesses, I mean, whether the user group is a developer or a DevOps guy, I think any businesses essentially look at three fundamental tenets, and which we are going to talk about in a short while, which is about the stability, cost, and security. I think cost, as I talked about, doing more automation so that the cost becomes within the manageable limits. Is the code stability, is the process stability right there, so that both DevOps as well as the developers are building and staging and productionizing their workloads essentially more sophisticatedly, etc. And of course, other applications secure enough, because we are putting huge amount of data. We are putting everything, whether we are doing an on-prem, whether doing hybrid, whether we're doing fully on cloud. Security is, I mean, something that we can't stop to talk about. Now, fundamental broad features, what we thought about: intuitive UX, as I said, making it very simple as a user experience. Guardrail provisioning is where you actually define how DevOps, sort of visualizes how developers should, provision their applications, write their applications without worrying about the complexities of infrastructure or Kubernetes per se. How is the information being abstracted and being used? How collaborative are these building blocks? Because when it comes to debugging something as complex as Kubernetes, I think the biggest thing which people talk about is the lack of collaboration and debugging. So I think we have paid special attention to those kind of features. And the final thing is the data collection, because you're talking about so many sniffers, the data being collected at so many different levels. How do you process that data? How do you show that data? And we're going to talk about that. We'll show you some screenshots there as well. So that's the blueprint of the whole AppOps platform. Three pillars, as I talked about: stability, security, and cost. Let's look at stability a little bit, for a couple of minutes. So I think very, very strongly it talks about how soon can you ship a particular feature. Um, Literally with the smallest possible time and with no downtime at all. And because most of the features, whether you're a fintech, insurtech, deep tech, or any kind of tech, and I think pretty much in today's world, every business that we talked about is a business of software. And I think you can't take that emphasis away from, um, you know, irrespective of the use case that you're running on. Software is one underlying technology layer which kind of runs. Real timeliness is another virtue which kind of is almost unparalleled and non-negotiable. Zero downtime or a minimum downtime is literally one KPI which everybody wants to sort of measure and wants to keep a strong control over. Now, what are the ways to measure stability? For example, MTTR is a globally acceptable KPI or a metric. Keep the mean time to recovery, very, very less, so that, applications are quickly recovered in case there is something wrong. Deployment frequency should be higher. I mean, I remember the days from monoliths to virtualized machines, and today's time of microservices. There are still situations where you're actually deploying in weeks, but how do you deploy literally every day and after every hours? And being deployment means that you've actually run the entire cadence through the entire staging, production, QA, etc., and then finally deploying it. So what is the lead time to, basically deployment, etc.? So these are some of the tenets of stability. So what are the key features under the stability? Now, stability, there are two user groups within stability, as I talked about. This is the application stability I'm talking about. So you have developers and you have the DevOps folks. Few things: automated analysis and remediations. Single pane view. I talked about the emphasis on debugging, abstraction in Kubernetes and cloud information, alerting and monitoring. What are the systems? What are the third-party systems that you're using? Drift management, environment drift management, as you move between the environments of staging, production, QA, etc. Are there any blackout windows which you should watch out for to decide basically it's not feasible to deploy? And how do you get automatic data gathering from various different sources that are available to you? Because when you're building an open source, and I said in the beginning that what Devtron has built and the whole AppOps platform is completely open source. And we have paid special attention to make sure that the current open source systems and people who have done build systems or subsystems around the whole CI/CD process or the dev tool chain are fully, available and integrable within the Devtron systems, including, we use many of the industry leading things for CD or CI or whatever, to make sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheels which have been already been created, etc., and invented. This is like I thought, I'll give you a little, because wanted to give a little peek of the system. So this is like how this is actually a peek into our app details page, where it gives you a little bit of screenshot of workflows, build history, application metrics to us. I mean, it gives you a sense of what's happening into the system on the app details page. So it talks about it, sort of gives you a very nice dashboard about metrics, app configuration, reporting, what application metrics, what application using what matrices, for example, and what are the various integration touch points that we have with third parties, etc. This is a sense of, we talked about the features. This is various events that get generated into the system of applications. So this is like, you can literally look at each event and do analysis and remediation depending on what they offer. This is a little bit of the environment drift and the environment override kind of feature, where we are talking about as you straddle between production environment, staging environment, dev environment, etc. So this is a dashboard which sort of captures that. I'm just broadly taking you through some of these things. Of course, any of you have deep interest in some of these things, depending on what backgrounds you are, we can run you through detailed demo in subsequent sessions, or otherwise when I give you information about where you can learn more about specifics of the features and the application. This sort of screenshot talks essentially about the post CD steps, etc., workflows, and what you can define at different stages with respect to the workflow, build history, deployment histories, etc. Now let's spend a couple of minutes on security. So we captured, we started with AppOps. Why did we do AppOps? What are the features? We talked about stability aspects and some of the screenshots on the stability side of things. Let's spend a few minutes on security side of things. Security, so I talked about AppOps. So I think if you put security right in the middle, so it's AppSecOps, like a DevSecOps. So since it's very application centric, so we talk about security as an inherent feature of that. So I think we all know that, how a insecure or a very fragile application or a securities, it is, if the system is very vulnerable and a whole lot of systems fraught with problems, how does it affect the businesses? So there's credibility loss, there is straight away revenue loss, if nothing else. And then there is cost escalations on both sides. I mean, one good example is the Bitcoin mining example, very recent about the Tesla case. Now, having identified what it does to the business, I think everybody knows that. And how do you measure security? One of the measures of security is how many violations are there available, and what are the critical and applications important on, what are the critical nature of which application, what is the process, which application should be allowed what policies, etc., and how many violations can the business tolerate, and how many can you sense well in time so that you can actually almost avoid making those mistakes, or looking at some of these vulnerabilities and fix them then and there. Is the global database of CVE or vulnerabilities essentially available so that they are, measured as well as traced well in time, so that, it's kind of alerted really in the real time and can be adhered to from a certain solution. So 4 things that we do to implement access control. We have all kinds of RBACs to do access control. There is audit logs literally available to, from every point of action that you happen to do on the Devtron platform. You can define as many as complex policies depending on the business use case, the environment that you're controlling in, the country that you're operating in, everybody, and especially on-prem Kubernetes, etc., where the data needs to be on-prem, or some part of the data can be on the cloud, etc. All of those policies can be done. And then, of course, there is the whole scanning feature about right at the code, images, configurations, etc. This sort of screenshot takes you a little bit of this. These are again screenshots taken from the product where we are talking about security policies. How can you define CVEs? What are the common vulnerabilities and exposures? All kinds of things are exposed there, and you can look at all of those within your global parameters, within your clusters, within your environments, within your applications. So there are all multiple levels of security being talked about. This is a specific example of CI and app detail security issues. Just a a little bit of an actual data that tells you that which are the severity levels, which is moderate, which is critical, what is good to go, etc. Audit log page again gives you a complete audit of and logs, and you can do grep on the logs. You can process them, remediate them whichever way you feel like. This talks about literally audit log on all the deployments that have happened in the past, so that you can really trace it back, and if there is any remediation that you want to do and fix that particular bug, you can do that. Now, coming to the third and the last aspect of AppOps. So we talked about the stability part, we talked about the security part, and I think that this is the most important for the businesses, which is the cost element. Now, there are two broad costs that are entailed with every organization that we talked about, which is entailing IT costs or cloud costs, or managing both IT or cloud, depending on what nature of business you are in, whether you're on-prem or whether you're on cloud. So I think first is the infrastructure related cost escalations. And second is the human resources cost of managing these, IT networks. So cost of your DevOps, cost of your developers, and of course the cost of managing everything, which is the infrastructure. Now, various ways to measure cost is literally cost per API call. How many API calls have been done to, sort of manage, different infrastructure kind of things, and what is the management cost of managing these. Now let's look at that. What are the elements, or what are the tenets available in the Devtron framework to manage costs? So A is the resource optimization. When I say resource optimization, what I mean is the dynamic resource application, or availability to the application. For example, hibernate is one good example, that if an application has to hibernate, then it should not use any resources, and the application should be intelligent enough to know, if I'm not being used, I should hibernate and release the resources that has been allocated to it. A very good example in the infrastructure side of literally all cloud providers is the utilization of Spot. How well do you utilize Spot, and how do you automate the Spot utilization across clusters? Then the third and very important one is the whole bin packing. How tightly can you pack your applications into the nodes and pods, right up to that pod level? And of course, the correct instance selection, which goes hand in hand with both bin packing. What is the right instance of an application that you select, so that you can allocate resources just to retrofit it. So these are the four ways we take care of the cost, and cost optimization. And this is a good example of, as I talked about Hibernate just a few seconds back, essentially what is the kind of resources the application has to scale up or scale down, looking at allocating resources automatically, literally. And you can actually define all through, manually. And we also have many features are automated, where the AI ML module that we are working on and will be released soon will talk about, actually, depending on the model of a particular application, and the business model that presents, that at nights or at certain spikes when there are sales, etc. I'm just giving an example of an e-commerce website being built on a certain scale. How do you auto capture these resources, and when the load is down, you can release those in almost in a real time and dynamic fashion. Environment specific configurations. This is how you deploy that. And this is a good example of application matrices. Now this dashboard is again a real dashboard, where you're talking about literally at the aggregate level, what is the CPU usage per applications, memory usage per applications, the throughput usage, the latency. Now you can define it at the aggregate level, pod level, and literally at any time you can plot it at any time zone, or do a comparison between application A and application B at pod level, cluster level, node level. So that gives a very solid view of how the applications is in real time behaving and consuming usage. So a very sophisticated analysis has been done on the consumption of an application with respect to the resource use and consumption. I think I'll just, before I go to the fourth point. So this is the infrastructure side of things. What I want to, spend maybe another half a minute on the HR cost that I talked about in the cost. What we've seen is once you start using Devtron and, because of the automation we bring about, not just in the whole CI/CD process, but actually in the application first approach, there is automations right from the get-go. So literally, if the industry ratio for, let's say, an application to a DevOps is, let's say, 7-1 or 8-1, like with every 7 developers, you got to have one DevOps, engineer or DevOps resource. We have seen across our subset of customers that increase to almost 50-1. So 50 developers to 1 DevOps, because what you're doing is essentially taking a whole lot of load issues from DevOps guys to managing Kubernetes and to managing applications between the developers and DevOps to a very single pane, sophisticated view, so that DevOps guys can only focus on the stuff that they are supposed to do and not worry about the application load and configurations and how the applications has been ported onto the Kubernetes, etc. So I think these are the two ways. So as I saw about infrastructure, as I talked about the human resource cost of optimization. So I think in summation, we talked about the history of DevOps, we talked about the dev tool chaining, we talked about the open source Devtron AppOps model. Within AppOps, we looked at cost, stability, and security aspects, and why we should do AppOps here. So I think that sort of brings us to the conclusion of what Devtron system is, and what are the ways you could try. For example, as I said, Devtron is an open source system. There are 2 ways, very simple. For now, we are on Discord, so there's a Discord link. You could try reaching out us on Discord channel, or you could absolutely, and I would highly encourage you to look at the GitHub URL and go and download and just play around with what we have built. And yeah, that's it. This sort of brings me to the end of a little presentation that I had. I hope it was not too boring, not too verbose, not too technical, and gave you a little bit of a good overview on the system. Now I'll pause and over to you, Garima, or anybody has any questions or any thoughts, comments, happy to answer them.
Right. Thank you, Raj, for this wonderful presentation. It looks very promising. Before I have my questions, before I jump into that, I would like to ask the community if anyone has any questions at this point in time. You can unmute yourself and ask your questions. Okay, so meanwhile, people are coming up with their questions. I would like to understand from you if anyone in this community wants to contribute to this open source initiative. How would they collaborate with the team? Before we jump into the community aspect of open source, we would also like to know about how the licensing works for Devtron, and maybe you can throw some light on how many contributors are you looking towards, and some perspective around some users if you're looking for that.
Sure. So I think it's a good question. So first, let's just get the licensing out of the way. We are right now in Apache license 2.0. So pretty much that's the licensing configuration we are on. As far as the community contributions are concerned, we've been open source only 6 months. So when I say, I think the GTM or the go-to model for us, because what we have built is a highly sophisticated platform. It's We are making it more modular, and pretty much it is 100% focused at the community. So who's our audience? Our audience is developers who are looking to work on Kubernetes, have already worked on Kubernetes and are looking to simplify things. Our audience is, as I said, developers and DevOps both. It's a dev tool chain which sort of connects the dots between these two, because there was a huge gap between these two things. Now, coming back to community, how many users, how many maintainers we want. I mean, this is out and open. I mean, when I talked about GitHub and what we have, sort of left open at it, anybody can contribute, anybody can look at the builds that we have, anybody can be a maintainer. And I think being a community project, we would love to have as much as participation as possible. There is literally no limit to people who want to contribute in the use cases that they are dabbling in, or actually open questions and open and actually feedback and bugs. I mean, literally it's a community. And part of the reason, and I want to step back and a little bit talk about why we chose to be open source rather than a we started the company as closed course code, and then we moved to open source. The simple idea was that we wanted to democratize the Kubernetes experience. And the only way to break it open is to actually make it available for all kinds of contributions and literally for free. So whether you are a Netflix, whether a user sitting in Netflix, or whether you're a small startup who's dabbling into Kubernetes and literally any part of the world, look at the readmes and there is what is available, and you could always come and join us on Discord, ask questions. We can help you get onboarded with it. Um, Play with the platform. There are so many paying customers we have as well who have actually gone ahead and after using us for free have said that, we want dedicated support. We want certain features which you are not released to the community. We want it fast because they're really loving the system. So our idea is, all the features would be available to community eventually, and we will release as we are releasing features. They'll be up for grabs for all people. This is highly focused on Kubernetes. So anybody who's on Kubernetes is welcome to use us, is encouraged to use us, and people who are thinking of moving into Kubernetes is also welcome to sort of use us, because that's how we're gonna in fact help them move to Kubernetes as well. So I think there is no limit, as per your question, Garma, to sort of have as many as contributors, as many as users join us and make us really part and worthy of the community that we ought to be.
Yeah, and thank you for this explanation. I guess many of us will be enticed and intrigued to contribute to Devtron platform. Because we run a community, we also are very supportive about, what is the kind of leadership ladder when we talk about, let's say, open source contributors. So have you thought about, building up a leadership ladder for these contributors? How do you kind of pull out the matrices and see if there are some profiles which you can lift up in your leadership ladder within your contribution community? How do you see that? And because we have a direct communication now from the leadership team here, so I would like to have some reflections on that.
Sure. So I think it's still early days, but as I said, I think and in fact, just for the audience as well, we recently got incorporated in the US. So we are technically now US company. We are incorporated in US Delaware C Corp. So North American market essentially is going to be, I mean, it already was our forte, but it's going to be increased focus on that market. So when it comes to leadership profiling, etc., so contributors who are willing to contribute to our cause as well as the cause of the community. And I think we are very open to the ideas of making sure we run specific programs to make sure leaders, I mean, it's like train the teacher kind of program, leaders learn from each other. We feel that we have done a whole lot of work in the last few years of absolutely being focused on Kubernetes. But I think until and unless we get challenged on what we have learned and we find specific leaders in any part of the world, or specifically North America, where at least 50% of the data of North American region, including Canada, is that people have been using Kubernetes to a lot extent and with fairly complex use cases. We felt that we've already contributed and we've already solved for some of those scale issues and problems around stability, cost, security. So contributors who are coming in, would be welcomed. We would launch programs where we would have a leaderboard. We will run specific workshops. We will have very specific demo sets around use cases. One case in point is pod eviction, crash loopback. What are the different use cases? Actually, go into specificity of certain problem sets, and our team is fully geared, literally 24/7 to sort of help people coming in from different geographies, boundaries, to make sure these leaders are not just awarded in a certain way, but they sort of build their own community around it. So what do we need to sort of help them, to support, to give them all the knowledge, to give them specific solutions that we have seen and actually learn from them. Specific programs will be launched, and we will be actually looking for ideas. I mean, I was talking to you earlier about it. Anybody at in this panel or in the audience literally has any ideas about us doing more than what we have thought about in building this community, we are all ears. We're going to spend a significant amount of time, effort in making this community robust and vibrant. So all ideas are welcome, and I can promise you on behalf of the leadership team that we will go an extra mile to make the contributors welcome at Devtron's community channels.
Yeah, and this is excellent to hear, because I believe that this is a new generation workforce which we are kind of developing here as part of the community of practice, as well as when we find these open source projects and platforms. It's very interesting how the convergence and how we bring these two things together to ensure that not only we learn and grow, but also our contributions are valued and we are co-creating in one way or the other. So it's extremely powerful. I would invite all community practitioners to have a look at it. If you want to initiate your open source journey, this is an excellent team, an excellent platform to start with. And I am hoping to actually integrate some of the ideas which we have brought forward in different open source communities from a leadership perspective into Devtron. And obviously, I'll connect back to you, Raj, for some of these idea storming sessions. So that's excellent. Any other questions at this point in time to Devtron's leadership team? Anyone wants to ask any questions? Okay, so we don't have any questions right now.
I was saying that people want to enjoy the Saturday, but keep coming in. I mean, questions, you don't have to worry about it. Garima has all the coordinates. I've given you ways to reach out to us. And I said, my last point is that any of you who's working deeply into Kubernetes or DevOps automation, DevOps tooling, we are, and we'll coordinate closely with you, Garima, and a few others. Anything, you want us in your current use case to give you product deep walkthrough. This was still in presentation. We are happy to go screen by screen, talking about the use cases that you are dabbling, helping you with some of the problems that you may be facing in your respective organizations, and help you get onboarded with Devtron. It is available open source, so strongly encourage to use it and give us feedback. Feedback is welcome, and that is exactly one single glue that will keep the community growing, actually.
Right, and it is good to see Discord, because we Canadians love Discord, right? You know about that. So again, thank you very much, Raj, for coming in. Thank you, Prakash, for joining Raj at this point in time. And we would converge different I would say events moving forward. So we look forward to work with Devtron, and of course, all the community contributions from Canada DevOps community of practice. We welcome you all to participate and grow this platform. So again, thank you, and have a nice evening or nice day, depending on where you are.
Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you very much, all. Bye.
Bye-bye.